Before we begin, the name is placed at the top right corner of the screen. A small girl came running towards Ms. Hannah, clinging to her clothes before hugging her tightly like she was trying to merge into her soul, and Hannah gently tapped her head, smirking as she said, "Yes, Mika." The little girl looked up with bright eyes and said, "Look over there. The apples are ripe." Hannah nearly melted on the spot thinking, "How cute, what an angel," and said, "Shall we pick some apples for our afternoon snack?" To which Mika eagerly responded that she would love to. Hannah then suggested they call Jeremy and Ian to join them too. But the moment she said it, Mika's entire vibe did a 180 as she turned around looking personally offended by the idea. Hannah blinked and asked, "What's wrong? Did you guys fight again?" Secretly wondering if she'd missed a kid-sized gang war during laundry duty. Mika replied that they didn't fight, she was just worried there wouldn't be enough apples, which was totally believable and definitely not a petty excuse at all. Hannah smiled, patting her head again while thinking how ridiculously adorable this was, and reassured her that there were plenty of apples for everyone. Spotting Jeremy and Ian sitting together like two mischief bombs waiting to go off, Hannah called out, "Come, let's pick apples together." Both boys came running with the energy of caffeine-fueled squirrels, Jeremy shouting that he would pick the most and asking if he could pick the green ones too, then suddenly veering into paranoia asking if there would be worms because apparently this was a high-stakes apple harvest. They all started bombarding her with questions, chanting, Miss Hannah, will you make us some apple pie?" And Hannah laughed, agreeing that she'd make one for all of them. She told them to go ahead and pick as many apples as they could while she hung the basket. The three of them clenched their fists in excitement and declared war on the apple tree, shouting they'd be the first to pick one. Hannah looked at them while hanging up laundry, thinking, just look how cute they are, like tiny chaos muffins. But then, that thought shifted into something darker. Who would have imagined that those adorable little children, with their innocent smiles and grubby hands, were the future villains who would destroy the Empire? That's right. These three were the main characters from The Brilliant Villains, a novel Hannah had been reborn into. Mika, age 9, would become a mad magician and leader of a dark magic guild bent on ending the world. Jeremy Arlando, also 9, would rise as the mastermind of the criminal underworld, doing literally anything for money. And Ian, age 10, would grow into the Empire's tyrant, turning it into a fairy tale version of a nightmare. Jeremy, still oblivious to the future, beamed and asked, "Miss Hannah, I'm great at picking apples, right?" Meanwhile, Hannah was trying not to scream into the laundry basket. Hannah smiled and said, "Yes, you are amazing," while thinking to herself, who could have imagined you'd be out here slicing throats with that same enthusiasm one day? Still, she had to admit the kids were turning out far nicer than she expected. Was it her influence? Her exceptional care? Her unmatched patience in the face of chaos gremlins? She liked to think so. But then her eyes drifted toward the muddy patch where Ian and Jeremy had been earlier, poking around with a stick like two tiny witches doing a ritual. And the moment she saw what they had created, her eyes nearly popped out. It was a perfectly detailed little mud person with its head and limbs deliberately separated from the torso, like some kind of DIY crime scene. Hannah stared at it for a second, wondering if she should be concerned or call a tiny exorcist, but eventually thought, well, it's perfectly normal for children at this age to draw weird things. Yeah, sure, if you're raising future horror game protagonists. She swiftly rubbed it out with her foot like it was a browser history she didn't want anyone to see and told the kids it was time to go. As she walked, she thought about how their peaceful days together had started in the most messed up way possible. It had been total chaos from the beginning, not that she knew it back then. At first, she just thought she'd entered someone else's body, which, no big deal, happens every Tuesday apparently. But she had no idea this was inside a novel. This place was a small orphanage connected to the temple, and the body she now lived in belonged to its caregiver, a woman who'd grown up in the same orphanage for 15 years and ended up staying because she couldn't become a priest. Hannah figured all this out from the memories she absorbed like some creepy memory sponge. Her first day at work had been normal enough if you consider soul transfer and existential dread normal, but everything changed when the kids introduced themselves. The moment they said their names, she paused and thought, those sound kind of familiar, like I've read them somewhere. Then the realization drop-kicked her brain. She'd read a novel with these exact names. Her friend had recommended it as a great stress reliever, which was funny because what kind of serotonin-deprived maniac recommends a bloodbath novel for relaxation? The book was famous for its insane violence and gory scenes, and now here she was, standing in it like some discount Ice Guy protagonist. At first, she clung to the hope that it was all just a coincidence, that these sweet kids with their murdery names weren't those characters. But the eye colors, the hair shades, everything lined up perfectly. It didn't take long before she had to accept the truth. She was now living inside the world of the brilliant villains. And when those kids called her name for the first time, her soul practically left her body. Because Hannah, the original Hannah, was the temple caretaker who abused them and got murdered in the most dramatic way possible when everything went to hell. Burned to ashes, body unrecoverable, total final boss defeat. Basically, she speedran getting cancelled by the entire cast. That night, the moment Hannah realized the full weight of her situation, she frantically shoved everything back into her bag while whispering like a half-broken NPC, "I can't do this. I cannot do this. If I die like in the novel, sure, maybe I'll wake up back home. But what if I don't? What if I just die and respawn in hell's Wi-Fi dead zone?" Plus, it's not like she ever wanted to abuse children. Honestly, her conscience would rather do taxes than harm these little chaos beings. Instead of following the original storyline and signing her own death certificate, she figured it was smarter to just dip and survive in this body. She started sobbing, full melodrama mode, muttering, "I can't believe I'm the villainess of an orphanage. Like, who even writes that? That's not even a cool villain arc, that's just sad." But at least she hadn't hurt them yet, so she decided it wasn't too late to ghost this entire mess. She tiptoed her way toward the door, reasoning that if she left now, no one would suspect anything. After all, she wasn't the real Hannah, just a hijacker in the body. She whispered an apology like she was quitting a job she only held for 3 business days, hoping the kids would meet a nice teacher, grow up, and maybe not murder anyone or set the capital ablaze in the future. But just as she was sneaking out, the most cursed sound in horror movies and real life alike echoed behind her. "MS. Hannah?" She froze like someone caught stealing snacks at 2 a.m. and slowly turned to see Mika, half awake, eyes squinting and rubbing them in confusion. Jeremy and Ian followed right behind, all three standing like a mini boss battle lineup. Hannah tried to stay calm, but internally she was screaming, "Why is everyone awake in the middle of the night? Do they have sixth sense or just bad sleep hygiene?" Mika's gaze landed on the bag in her hand and asked, "MS. Hannah, are you abandoning us?" And just like that, the drama dial got turned up to 11. Mika's eyes welled with tears as she said, "Are you really leaving?" And Jeremy, clearly born for main character trauma, added, "See, I told you no new teacher would ever like us." Hannah got hit with guilt so hard she almost folded on the spot. Her brain was spiraling like a browser with 37 tabs open, thinking if she left now, they'd 100% grow up, hunt her down, and dramatically say, "You left us when we were kids, remember? Cue the dagger. Cue the fire. Cue the Netflix adaptation." Mika began sobbing for real now, her tiny voice breaking as she cried, "Hannah?" And Hannah just stood there, panic and regret flooding her faster than a spoiler thread. And somewhere deep in her soul, she realized, congrats girl, you just unlocked the tragic backstory DLC. But even as the children looked up at her with teary eyes and sniffly noses, Hannah's thoughts were a mess of panic and guilt. These kids might look pitiful, they might act hurt and abandoned, but she couldn't forget what kind of characters they would become: villains, monsters, chaos incarnate. She told herself she had to get out. Yet her mind drifted back to something that had haunted her for the past 10 years. That day had been strange. Her younger brother had come to her, smiling, and said, "Sis, let's go to the store together." She normally would have gone along with him, like always, but that day she'd been exhausted, her patience thin like Wi-Fi in a basement, and she snapped, telling him to go alone. He did, and he never came back. Ever since then, seeing kids around his height made her stomach twist with regret, like she'd swallowed an emotional cactus. The last words he ever said to her still echoed in her chest, each syllable a punch to the heart. And now, watching Mika cry and whisper, "Are you leaving?" something inside her broke. She saw her brother in their faces, and even though she knew these kids weren't her siblings, weren't even real people outside this cursed novel, they felt real enough to stop her in her tracks. "So Shelit." She wiped her tears, turned back, and said that she was just moving to a more comfortable room. "Don't worry, don't cry." And in that moment, all three of them rushed forward and hugged her so tight it felt like her spine might pop. "Please don't leave us." It hit her like a truck made of emotional damage. She knew these kids were just text on a page brought to life, that this was all someone's twisted story, but she couldn't turn her back on crying children, not when she saw her brother's shadow in them. Maybe she was being soft-hearted. Maybe she was being a world-class idiot. Or maybe this was just her villain origin story, but in reverse. Either way, she knew she couldn't walk away now. She sighed, deeply, knowing she just dug her own grave with a golden shovel. Since things had turned out this way, she decided she'd at least raise them right. Make sure they didn't go full villain mode. In the past few days, she'd been observing them like a secret agent nanny. Mika was loud, spirited, and always the first to start talking and the first to start yelling. Jeremy was a little rascal, as naughty and mischievous as a gremlin on sugar. Ian was the opposite, cold, blunt, and reserved like someone with 5 backup plans and 0 time for nonsense. The 3 of them couldn't be more different, which is probably why they fought constantly. Not mild sibling spats, but full-on, WW-level drama over things like who got the slightly shinier spoon. And yet, strangely, they never played together. It was weird. Kids that age usually squabble and make up 5 minutes later. But these 3 always stayed apart. She didn't understand why, but she hoped just maybe if she stayed, she could change that too. Mika was swinging on a tree branch, Ian sat quietly against the trunk, and Jeremy was going full psycho with a stick yelling, "Die, you piece of trash." Ian grunted, "Stop it." Mika shouted, "Idiot." And just like that, the 3 were on the verge of another chaos match. Meanwhile, Hannah was peacefully digging up carrots like her life didn't depend on keeping 3 future supervillains from self-destructing. She thought, I'm just gonna focus on these carrots and pretend I don't hear the background murder soundtrack. Mika suddenly ran over and asked, "Want me to help?" Hannah smiled. "Oh, Mika, you want to help me?" Mika nodded, and together they tapped the soil and plucked out the carrots. Mika then asked, "What's on the menu?" Hannah said, "Beef stew with a ton of vegetables." Mika scrunched her face. You really don't need to add so many veggies." Hannah, unfazed, replied, "Since all of you are picky eaters, I have to sneak them in." Mika looked mildly betrayed but then quickly switched gears, saying, "Well, I guess I don't mind vegetables." Then she asked Ms. Hannah, "Why do we always have class outside?" Hannah froze. She thought, "Oh right, I still have no idea what the curriculum even is." She answered smoothly, "My idea of education's a little different." Mika blinked. "Idea of education?" Hannah said, "I want you to grow up strong and healthy with nature, not just books." "Totally not, because I have 0 idea what I'm supposed to be teaching." Mika lit up, saying, "Oh, that's cool." Hannah smiled weakly, thinking, "Sorry, I'm just winging it and hoping for the best." Jeremy came strutting up from behind and kicked Mika in the back like he was starting a WWE match in broad daylight. Mika didn't even flinch, just tilted her head slowly and said, "Why are you kicking me with your grubby feet?" Jeremy replied that she already had plenty of dirt on her anyway. Mika grabbed him by the collar and declared she was already dirt. Jeremy casually agreed, "Yeah, you are." That was the last straw. She tightened her grip and yeeted him straight onto the ground like she was channeling her inner final boss. Hannah, in full crisis mode, tried to step in. Mika just smirked and told Jeremy, "Since you're already dirty, might as well roll around in it too." Hannah barely managed to let out a panicked "Wait, stop," before Mika lunged again and Jeremy screamed that she better let go. Mika shouted back asking why he always had to bother her and pulled her fist back for a clean swing. Hannah, now emotionally on fire, begged her not to hit her friends. Mika fired back saying it's okay to hit idiots who don't know their place. Honestly, she's not wrong. If this was Twitter, she'd be trending. Jeremy asked if she really thought she could beat him, and Hannah broke into tears, yelling for someone to stop. Just then, Ian appeared. For a split second, Hannah felt hoping maybe he was here to break up the fight. But he just stood there like a bystander in a school hallway holding his book. Of course, a rogue rock from the chaos smacked his book and scratched it. He stared at it for a solid second, then launched the book at the other 2 and even threw his gloves for good measure. Hannah watched all this unfold and thought, why did I even expect anything from him? Later at the temple, she met with the priest who asked how things were at the orphanage. She replied that the children were well. He clenched his teeth like he just bit into something bitter and said he needed to get rid of the orphanage. Hannah blinked. "What do you mean?" He explained that the funding was being cut this year, and it wasn't enough to raise 3 kids. She thought, sure, not enough for you to line your pockets. He added that he'd love to shut it down immediately, but if the Central Temple did an audit, he'd have to return the money he already used, and that was not happening. Truly, a man of God. She asked what would happen to the children if he shut the place down, saying they had nowhere else to go. But in her mind, the panic was setting in. In the novel, the orphanage didn't get closed this fast. The high priest and the original Hannah just made life miserable until the kids ran away. After that, they all got separated and started their villain origin arcs. Mika turned into a full-blown chaos, which, Ian got reclaimed by some lurking aristocrat like he was a misdelivered Amazon package. But Jeremy had it rough. That boy was basically forced to become the main character in a crime documentary. He was starving, homeless, and ended up doing every job short of robbing a dragon. The priest, utterly heartless, said they were old enough to fend for themselves. She wanted to scream they just turned 9 and 10, not file taxes and pay rent. But he wasn't done. He told her to cut food expenses immediately, claiming he didn't fund the orphanage so she could go on a grocery shopping spree. She thought this dude really out here acting like giving the kids cabbage water is a luxury. She bought that food with her own salary, not his holy penny. Then he stared at her, real serious, and asked if he needed to beat her like he did when she was a child. Her whole body froze. The memory didn't even belong to her, but her soul flinched. She tried to remind herself that she was not the original Hannah, but the fear hit different. Who knew trauma could be contagious? He turned to leave, reminding her to keep saving money until the place gets shut down. He mentioned Chasen was already looking for a place to dump the kids. She thought maybe, just maybe, a normal orphanage might be safer than this place. So she smiled, quietly replied all right, and accepted her new role as the mother of 3 future world-ending gremlins. At the orphanage, Hannah stepped inside just in time to hear Mika declaring she wanted corn soup. Jeremy chimed in right after, asking for sweet bread. Mika casually fired back that he's always eating sweets and that's why he's fat. Jeremy gasped like he just got hit with a critical hit and shouted he wasn't fat, he was all muscle. Mika laughed and said Hannah liked her best, so obviously, her corn soup wish would be granted. Jeremy practically growled, asking what nonsense that was. Mika rolled her eyes, calling him stupid and doubling down that she was the favorite. Jeremy clenched his fists and challenged her to a bet based on whose favorite food would end up on the table. That's when Ian, who had been silently judging from the sidelines, finally spoke, saying there was too much dust flying around thanks to their chaos. Mika glared at him like he just insulted her entire bloodline. Ian kept going, casually mentioning that Jeremy, of all people, was definitely not Hannah's favorite, since all he ever does is cause trouble. Jeremy barked back asking what he just said, and Mika demanded to know if he thought Hannah liked him the most. Ian shrugged like this was common knowledge. Jeremy looked like he was going to explode. Mika shouted for him to join the bet, and Ian, deadpan, picked braised fish like a man with refined tastes. The Chaos Trio decided that today's dinner would reveal who Hannah truly favored. Hannah, hearing all of this nonsense from around the corner, immediately turned to sneak back out. Stealth level 0. She thought if she pretended not to hear, maybe they'd forget. But of course, they spotted her instantly and called her over. She turned slowly and smiled through the panic. Then came the attack: sweetbread, corn soup, braised fish, all shouted at the same time as they surrounded her like mini debt collectors. Hannah froze. If she disappointed any of them, they might just snap and go full villain mode. They pressed her for an answer. She cried inside, wondering why she, a perfectly decent adult, was now emotionally held hostage by 3 children over dinner. That afternoon, Hannah ended up at the market, clutching her basket like it held the fate of the world. She told herself she'd do everything she could to eliminate future risk. If these kids were destined to become villains, the last thing she needed was them holding childhood grudges like, hey, remember that one time you made us eat boiled cabbage instead of sweet bread? Yeah, time to destroy the kingdom. She walked up to a vendor and asked how much the fish cost. The woman replied she'd give all of them for 1 silver. Hannah's jaw dropped, wondering if this was some divine miracle. The old woman smiled kindly and said she knew Hannah was the caregiver from the orphanage. If it's for the children, then it should be cheap. Hannah lit up with joy and thanked her repeatedly. The vendor added an extra fish, saying it tasted great grilled and didn't have many bones, so it'd be easy for the kids to eat. Hannah insisted on paying, but the woman refused, saying she'd seen how skinny the kids looked. Children need to eat well at that age. Hannah's heart melted. She promised she'd take good care of them, thanked the woman again, and waved goodbye. Her spirits lifted. A man approached the vendor and asked if that was her. The woman nodded, saying Hannah used her own salary to buy decent ingredients because the stuff from the temple was barely edible. There had been terrible rumors about the orphanage, but it looked like the new caregiver was actually decent. On the way home, Hannah skipped a little in her step, thinking she had to hurry back and start dinner. Tonight's meal was going to be top tier. But then she spotted Chasen loitering suspiciously. She figured he was probably out running shady errands for the temple. She considered crossing the street, faking a phone call, or spontaneously learning teleportation, anything to not interact. With a basket full of food and hope, she walked faster, excited about the rare occasion of a dinner that wouldn't be 90% potato. But she froze on the spot when she heard Chasen talking to a hooded man in an alley. Chasen was casually discussing, like he was bargaining for potatoes, that if they were going to sell them as test subjects, they wanted double the price. The hooded man seemed mildly horrified and said that was too much, especially since the kids were so young. Chasen asked how much he could get, and the man offered 500 gold per kid. Chasen pushed for more if he handed over all three. Hearing that, Hannah's soul practically left her body. She ducked behind a wall, brain short-circuiting at the words per kid and test subject. Chasen then added he couldn't hand them over right away but would make contact after the audit. The man reminded him the kids had to be healthy, and Chasen smugly said not to worry. Hannah's thoughts spiraled. This was insane. She recalled the priest saying Chasen was finding a place to send the children, but this was something straight out of a horror novel. Selling children like livestock? Even for a corrupt temple, this was next-level trash behavior. She swore right there she wouldn't let it happen. When she got home, she cooked them the best dinner she could. There was warm soup, sweet bread, and a perfectly grilled fish. Mika hugged her tight and said she didn't need to bring all that. The bread and fish were already enough. Hannah looked at them and said she wanted to make something very clear: she doesn't play favorites. Jeremy, his mouth stuffed with bread, said that was weird because his bread was obviously the best. Hannah smiled, but inside, her soul was screaming because the same kids laughing around her were the ones being priced like market goods hours ago. Hannah lay flat on her bed, eyes wide open, sleep nowhere in sight. Her thoughts kept racing. She had to do something. Anything. But what could she even do? She was just a salaried employee barely hanging on to her job, and honestly, it looked like she was about to get booted out any day now. She had no special skills, no physical strength, and zero money. Was she supposed to run off with the kids and raise them on her own? That sounded heroic until she remembered she couldn't even keep a cactus alive. And raising 3 kids? That was a whole survival show. Still, her conscience screamed louder than her fear. The temple had been embezzling funds for ages, using fake orphanages and care homes to grab extra subsidies. If they were getting state money, there had to be a ledger somewhere tracking how it was spent. She clung to that thought. If she could find the ledger, she could use it as leverage, expose the corruption, and protect the kids. Her plan was clear: find the ledger and blackmail the temple. Easy, right? Totally not like going up against an entire institution with the power to make people vanish. The next morning, she kept things normal. Jeremy and Mika were asking questions again, and Hannah turned it into a teaching moment. She asked them what people use on a rainy day. Jeremy said a raincoat. Mika said an umbrella. Hannah asked why we use those, and they both responded so you don't get wet. Then she looked at the two and blinked. If the goal was to stay dry, then why were they standing there drenched and caked in mud like they'd lost a wrestling match with a swamp? Honestly, they looked like 2 soggy potatoes fresh out of a dirt blender. Mika proudly said it was fun to stomp around in the mud on a rainy day, and Jeremy backed her up like it was a universal truth, adding that the splashing sound was the best part. Hannah stared at them like they'd just confessed to committing a crime against laundry. She calmly told them if they caught a cold, it would hurt a lot, and worse, she'd be really sad. That hit different. Both of them immediately looked down, guilt creeping in, and quietly muttered that they didn't want to get sick. Seeing their mood drop like wet socks, Hannah softened her tone and said they didn't need to be that upset. Just don't get soaked next time. Now let's go take a warm bath. She turned to Ian and said he should join them too. Ian just stood there like a statue holding a basket, giving her a long stare that screamed, "I did not sign up for this." She clapped her hands and told him to come along already. Later, with everyone gathered, she handed out the plan. Jeremy and Ian would use the boys' bathroom, and Mika would come with her. All 3 stared at her in silence, possibly processing the horror which was about to reveal. Hannah grabbed Mika's hand and declared she had to bathe. No arguments, especially Mika and Jeremy. Mika groaned but agreed. Hannah glanced at Jeremy, telling him to actually scrub himself. Mika tried to delay things, but Hannab cut her off and hurried them into the washroom, saying she didn't want to catch a cold either. Outside, Jeremy and Ian just stood frozen, and Jeremy mumbled under his breath, "That crazy punk." Hannah dragged Mika down the hall toward the other washroom, but her steps faltered when she caught sight of a massive spring bath tucked into the corner of the building like it belonged in a royal villa. She blinked in disbelief, thinking, when did we get a luxury spa inside this rundown orphanage? Mika looked just as lost, nervously glancing around but following quietly. When they reached the bath area, Hannah turned to Mika and told her gently to take off her clothes. Mika hesitated, but with visible confusion, began to undress. The moment the clothes dropped, Hannah's jaw practically hit the tiled floor. Her eyes went wide as she gasped and lunged forward to cover Mika in a panic. Her thoughts spun, what on earth is that little pea? No, wait, why is there a whole elephant down there? Hannah blurted out in complete shock. You're a boy. Out in the hallway, Jeremy overheard everything, let out a half laugh, half sigh, and said with that same deadpan face, I knew this day would come. Later that evening, Mika sat curled up on the bed, hugging a fluffy teddy bear. Hannah walked in with a calm smile and asked if Mika would rather wear some comfortable pants instead of the usual dress. Mika shook his head and said, but pants don't look pretty. Hannah raised an eyebrow and said, aren't dresses kind of uncomfortable though? Mika smiled softly and said, they are, but I really like the flares and the lace. Hannah looked at him for a moment and thought, so this is important to him. He then asked quietly, Miss Hannah, do you not like it when I dress like this? Hannah reached out and gently placed a hand on Mika's cheek. With a kind smile, she said, Mika, the reason I care about you isn't because I thought you were a girl. The people who truly love you won't care about what you wear or don't wear. They'll like you for who you are, not for your gender. Mika's eyes welled up and he whispered Miss Hannah before suddenly standing and throwing his arms around her. Hannah gently returned the hug, her heart tugging with emotion. She thought to herself, villains are really just like any other children when they're young. I thought I understood these kids. But it turns out I didn't even know Mika's gender. It was unexpected, yes, but not something that made her love him any less. Mika pulled back slightly and said he liked the dresses of the Empire and even admired Duke Doom's simpler style. Hannah smiled and told him he clearly had great taste. Inside, she reflected that no matter what she knew from reading their future, these children weren't villains right now. They were small and fragile and needed love, not fear. Then a random but very real question popped in her mind, do I give him boys' underwear or girls? She sighed, thinking either way, she'd just taken one small step away from their futures ending in flames. Later, she walked into the temple with a pit in her stomach. Nobody liked asking for a favor, especially when the favor had to come from the slimy high priest. She knocked on the office door and requested another advance on her salary. The priest, clearly distracted, frowned and said it was already the second advance. Hannah kept a polite expression but was screaming internally, wondering where he might be hiding the ledger. He looked up and asked if she was having financial trouble, then jabbed that she ate and slept at the temple and must be spending her salary on drinking. She forced a smile as he waved a hand and said the advance would be prepared, and she could collect it later. She replied with a practiced thank you. He asked how the children were doing. She responded with a yes, they are fine, though her mind screamed, it's not like you actually care. He dismissed her, and she bowed again, muttering in her head, you shameless old man. May your next address be hell. Just as she stepped out of his office, she bumped into Chasen. He greeted her with a fake smile, saying, Miss Hannah, how are things at the orphanage? Her smile twitched, knowing exactly why he was asking. She responded lightly that everything was fine and that the children were doing well. He asked if anyone was sick, and Hannah thought, the nerve of him. If I hadn't heard what he said that day, I might have actually believed he cared. But now his every word felt like poison dipped in sugar. She said they haven't had much of an appetite since getting drenched in the rain. They need to eat properly, but the temple's ingredients are awful. Then she added, but you already know that, don't you? If one of them catches a cold, they all might. They're so weak it could turn serious. He quickly asked if she needed medicine. She thought, of course he's worried they won't sell for much if they're sick. She told him what they really need is healthier food, lots of fruit and vitamins. He told her to write a list of what she needed. She acted surprised, saying really, while thinking just as expected. He said he'd bring them and added he was on his way to meet the high priest. She thanked him and watched him go. Then she leaned close to the door to listen. Inside, she heard them say, did you look into it? She thought, so they're planning to sell off the orphanage after the audit. They didn't mention the ledger, but now it's all clear. I have to act before summer ends. It was nighttime and Hannah lit a candle, trying to sneak into the high priest's office. As she crept down the hallway and opened the door, she thought they've pocketed so much money. Can't they at least oil the doors so they stop creaking? Of course, the door groaned like a dying goat the second it moved. Inside, she scanned the room thinking, where should I begin? That frame, that drawer, or maybe behind the bookshelf. She decided to start with the bookshelf since it looked the most suspicious. Despite being clueless, he kept all the complex books here. As she pulled one out, a thick cloud of dust exploded in her face. She coughed, thinking guess he only dusts the parts people can see. Classic fake cleanliness. Giving up on the shelf, she moved to the drawer. It had pens, papers, and walnuts? That was random. The next drawer was locked. She thought I should have learned how to pick locks with a bobby pin. Too bad my past life exam prep was totally useless here. After some fumbling, she finally found a key stuck underneath the drawer with chewing gum. She peeled it off and slipped it into the lock, wondering if it could really be this easy. Things were falling into place a little too well, and that made her suspicious. The drawer opened and bam, adult magazines. She smirked, saying ugh, pervert alert. She knew it was too good to be true. Not only was he greedy, but clearly gross too. She told herself to be extra careful going forward. If there was anything else hidden, a picture frame might be the next best place to check. Walking up to one, she thought maybe he wasn't as dumb as he looked. She moved the picture aside and spotted a strange symbol, thinking it might be from the temple, though it didn't look familiar. There was a number on each corner of a triangle: 2, 5, 8. She had no clue what it meant, but since there wasn't any safe in sight, she decided to head back for the night. The next day, Ian and Jeremy were fighting again. Hannah rushed over just in time. Ian snapped, "You're spitting on me. Keep your mouth shut." Hannah moved closer to Mika and asked what was going on. Mika said Ian keeps picking on Jeremy for everything he does. When Hannah asked what kind of things, Mika said Ian complains that Jeremy's toys are messy, that he's dirty because he doesn't bathe, and that he spits when he talks. Hannah thought it'd be tough even for an adult to keep up with Ian's cleanliness standards. She asked, since when did Ian care so much about cleanliness? Mika said he's always been like that. Hannah added, he's never been dirty in his whole life. Mika said he wasn't this bad before but is definitely getting worse. Hannah decided she needed to help Ian overcome his germophobia. That evening, Ian was reading when Hannah approached him. "Ian, how about we play in the sand today?" Ian made a face and quickly hid behind his book, saying, "The sand? I need to read." Hannah didn't give up though. She switched tactics. "Can you give me a hand instead?" "What do I need to do?" "I have to dig potatoes out of the garden, but my arms hurt and I can't use the shovel." Ian got nervous. "Potato? Dirt? Will you help me please?" Hannah thought I learned this trick from the kids' classic puppy eyes attack. Ian hesitated but finally agreed. "Okay, let's go." Hannah cheered. I knew this would work. At the garden, Hannah handed Ian a shovel and bucket. Ian put on gloves, but not just one pair, he wore 5 gloves on his hands. Hannah teased, "Are you sure you can dig up a potato like that?" Ian said yes confidently. Hannah joked, "But your hands are chubbier than the potatoes." He said he would give it a try. She said he started digging in the dirt. She asked, "How is it? Can you use your hand?" He said yes. She thought he couldn't even hold the shovel properly and guessed his stubbornness might be why he became a tyrant. Then she spotted a potato and said, "Look, these delicious potatoes are in the soil but they aren't dirty. Are they?" He said, "That's because you wash them before we eat." She replied, "Not really, I only wash them lightly. You've been eating soil this whole time." He looked a bit uncomfortable and asked, "Didn't you wash them thoroughly?" She glanced at Ian, who was staring at her with a scary, angry look. He stood up, turned, and said, "Sorry, I think I need to head inside first." Later, Hannah served food and said, "Ian, have some of these." He said, "No thanks." She said, "Okay, eat when you feel like it." Then she told the others, "Listen up. Ian dug up these potatoes, try them." Hannah thought he really wasn't in a good mood. Mika said he'd never acted like this before. Was it because he touched dirt? Hannah said she was trying to get him closer to nature with a hands-on approach this time. Jeremy said, "It's because he's a neat freak, right? Geez, I can't believe he's so sensitive about cleanliness." Mika shot back, "Who are you to say that?" Jeremy said, "I'm the only normal person here." Hannah said, "Well, that doesn't include me, right?" Then she told Jeremy not to say things like that and to be nice to his friends. Jeremy grumbled, "You're always scolding me." Hannah thought, oh no, now Jeremy's mad too. This is turning into a huge mess. Looks like cleanliness is the new battlefield. Who knew dirt could cause more drama than reality TV? Later, Hannah gathered all the art supplies and said, "How about we do some arts and crafts today?" Jeremy brightened up and said, "I love drawing. Let's make a picture with our handprints." Hannah said, "Wow, that's a great idea. Let's all try it together." Mika said, "I want to use red." Hannah asked Jeremy, what about you? Jeremy said, I want green. Both of them started making handprints on the paper. But when Hannah looked at Jeremy's painting, she saw he was only pressing his palm down with just the middle finger raised. She asked Jeremy, why aren't you putting down all your fingers? But Jeremy had his own reason. Ignoring that, she turned to Ian and asked, Ian, don't you want to join us? Ian said nothing and flipped his face away. She stood up and said, Ian, let's make a handprint drawing together. Come on, it's really fun. Walking towards him, she said, what's wrong? Ian, let's have some fun. You'll be sad if you don't have your own handprint drawing. She thought, I'm gonna take those gloves off no matter what. She grabbed his hand and said, how about we start by taking off your gloves? Ian, let me help you. He said, Miss Hannah. But she slid the gloves off his hand. He hesitated. Then she put yellow paint on his palm. He shouted, what are you doing? Jeremy and Mika burst out laughing, saying, wow, look at that wicked look on Miss Hannah's face. I knew I'd feel sorry for Ian. Hannah thought, did I go too far? She called Ian. Ian looked lost. He said, Miss Hannah, I really hate you. She reached to put her hand on his shoulder, but he quickly slapped it away and started crying, saying, don't touch me. Then he dashed off. Mika said, wow, he's really mad. Guess Hannah just learned the hard way painting gloves off is a war crime in Ian's book. Hannah stood confused, wondering what she had done wrong. She knocked gently on Ian's door and said, Ian, I left some warm milk and chocolates outside your door. I'm really sorry about earlier. I hope you'll forgive me. I was only trying to help, but I went too far. I should have stopped since you didn't want to do it. I'm sorry. No answer came from inside. She sighed and turned away, thinking he should drink the milk before it gets cold. That night, Hannah stepped outside and leaned against a tree, looking up at the sky. Raising and taking care of children is such a hard job. I thought fixing their bad habits was the right thing to do. But should I be forcing children to behave like adults? I have no idea what to do. She shouted, Father, tell me the answer. From a window, Jeremy watched her and thought, I knew it. I am the only sane person in this place. I am the only sane person in this place. The tray was still at Ian's door. Mika said, MS. Hannah, do you know how many times you've sighed at this tray today? Hannah said, probably every time I took a breath. Jeremy added, probably about forget about him. The stupid of him to strut over something like that. Hannah turned around and said, should we have class outside today? Mika said, but it's raining. Hannah replied, you all need to experience a rainy day too. Life isn't always sunny. Then she paused and said, but maybe you can't understand those big words. Let's go look for snails or something instead. Jeremy said, sounds good to me. I like snails. They're so slimy and slippery. Because nothing says life lessons like chasing snails in the rain, the ultimate classroom experience. Mika said she liked the rain too. But then suddenly she stopped and shouted as she ran back. Everyone asked what was wrong. And Hannah was sprinting outside yelling about Ian's blanket. Mika joked that if Ian found out, he'd probably foam at the mouth, and Jeremy felt sorry for Hannah already. Hannah got soaked running to the blanket she had hung out to dry, now drenched and heavy, hugging it while crying that she was definitely headed for the guillotine. As she tried to carry the soggy mess inside, she slipped and fell face first into the muddy ground, muttering about how doomed she was and what even she was doing out there. Lying there upset, she noticed the raindrops no longer hit her face. Surprise. The rain had stopped, and when she opened her eyes, Ian was standing nearby holding an umbrella, raising a hand as if to say, you'll catch a cold. Honestly, that moment was so wholesome. When your neat freak friend finally steps out of his bubble but still low-key cares about you not catching a cold.